Alright, well, here's take number 2 on my cell phone instead of on my webcam. I just spent the last 20 minutes doing this presentation and it just deleted itself, so going for a second time. My name is Josh Alston. I am doing this assignment for North Central University, Marriage and Family Therapy, MFT6102, and I guess second time's a charm. I know this is going to work, so I am sharing about schizophrenia and different diagnoses using the DSM-5, the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, and talking about schizophrenia. We're going to talk about the movie I watched called A Beautiful Mind. A Beautiful Mind is based on the book by the same name called A Beautiful Mind, and it's about a man by the name of Professor John Nash, and he struggles with paranoia and schizophrenia. And the beautiful thing about this beautiful mind is the idea that it's not something that manifests itself until later because of the work that he did, because of the things that he was accomplishing and his jobs, the classifications that he was under. His paranoia didn't manifest until it got really extreme. And it's an interesting case to be able to watch this video and to use this as a diagnosis, use this as a tool to help myself learn about this. So going through different things, the DSM-5 classifies schizophrenia, the spectrum, and the psychotic disorders, and it talks about the specific current severity of delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, abnormal psychomotor behavior, negative symptoms, impaired cognition, depression, and mania symptoms. Talking first to the delusions. Delusions are the belief or impression that is firmly maintained despite being contradicted by what is generally accepted as reality and rational arguments, typical symptom of a mental disorder. And Professor Nash definitely had this. So you could definitely see with the paranoia that we talked about before, the idea that government was after him and he was creating different things, and that brings it into the hallucinations that he had. Hallucinations are an experience involving an apparent perception of something that's not present, and we see that as one of the biggest things that we can see in the movie that it portrays, is that idea that his hallucinations began when he was at Princeton, and his roommate that he had that he made up to be able to, I'm not exactly sure the reasonings, but I mean, I don't understand schizophrenia, but that's one of the things that's interesting to see, that it was created a whole lifestyle, a whole character, a whole friendship and relationship out of nothing. And it's one of those things that you create a relationship and you create emotions that are tied to it. So definitely had hallucinations, and they were so intense to the point where that they made it real. They made life seem crazy. And I think that's one of the biggest things that jumped out, is that because he was doing classified work and working with the military, most people wouldn't have second guessed the idea of being paranoid, being back off-ish about what you're sharing with. You don't want to share things with the people, but it got to the point where it was so bad that he was bringing the reality into the paranoia and starting to do things that even a person that was classified would look at and say that's kind of odd to the things that he was doing. So hallucinations definitely were something that he was going through. Disorganized speech is the next one. It says typically arises from abnormal thought process. A person engaging in disorganized speech might quickly jump from one unrelated topic to another, engaging in incoherence. Word salad represents things other person says back to them, repeats other things people say back to them, or appears to be speaking with non-existent entities. And I think this, I put yes as something that I think Professor Nash showed. And one of the things that I made note of is the idea that he in his thought process as a genius, I mean, people might have think, oh, he's jumping back and forth, he's thinking about different things, it's too many different things at once. And I think it had a partial sense to the idea that it was a disorganized thought process, which made him to the almost point that it go insane, just going crazy, that he had to find something, that he had to create something that was unique at Princeton, or that he would have lost everything. And jumping from one idea to the other, that definitely came out when he was trying to explain things to people, and to see what even the other geniuses that were at Princeton had a hard time understanding what he was going through, what he was thinking, and so that it seemed like it portrayed in what he was doing. Next one, abnormal psychomotor behavior. Talked about the psychomotor retardation, or involving the slowing down of thoughts and reduction of physical movement in the individual. I didn't see this, so I ruled out this part of the spectrum because I didn't notice any physical or mental slowing down of what he had to offer. Negative symptoms was the next. Thoughts, feelings, and behaviors normally presented that are absent or diminished in the person with mental disorder. And I ruled this one out also too because I didn't feel like his thoughts or his feelings were absent or were diminished. I think in the opposite case, they were amplified and they were creating a false reality that added to what he was feeling. Impaired cognition, intermediate stage between the expected cognitive decline and the normal aging, and the decline of dementia. I ruled this one also because, like I said before, I didn't see it as something that was affecting him as his mind, but in losing something, but it was amplifying it. Depression, feelings of severe despondency and dejection. This was definitely something I put as a symptom of what Professor Nash was going through. He was definitely dejected, and he brought that up on himself. He said in the beginning, the truth is I don't like people much, and they don't like me, much like me. And so it showed the idea that he kept to himself. And it is interesting that through the depression, he might have created this false roommate in order to give him somebody that he enjoyed, that he talked to. Even though it seemed like way out of reach, it was somebody that gave him hope and gave him a good direction to go through. So many symptoms. The manic episode is not necessarily a disorder that talks about, but rather diagnosed as part of the conditions called bipolar disorder. And I ruled out the bipolar and that idea that he had elevated, expansive, or unusual, irritable moods. And I didn't see that necessarily in the ways they act. A lot of things would have brought him to just change in the way that he saw the hallucinations, the delusions that brought out. Those were main things that brought the idea onto the paranoid schizophrenia. A couple of interesting areas I went to, the National Institute of Health, and they talked about schizophrenia as a chronic and severe mental disorder that affects how a person thinks, feels, and behaves. People with schizophrenia may seem like they have lost touch with reality. Although schizophrenia is not as common as other mental disorders, the symptoms can be very disabling. And the signs and symptoms of schizophrenia usually start between 16 and 30. And in rare cases, children have schizophrenia too. The symptoms of schizophrenia fall in 3 categories. And I thought this was interesting when looking at a diagnosis of Professor Nash. It talks about positive, negative, and cognitive. Positive symptoms are the psychotic behaviors not generally seen in healthy people. People with positive symptoms may lose touch with some aspects of reality. Talked about the hallucinations, the delusions, thought disorders. And so this is something that you could definitely say, yeah, positive, Professor Nash had positive symptoms in regards to schizophrenia. Negative symptoms are associated with disruptive to normal emotions and behaviors. Symptoms include flat affect, reduction expression of emotions via facial expression or vocal tones, reduced feelings of pleasure in everyday life. And I when I'm looking at this, I didn't necessarily see this. And it could be one of those things that because of John's personality, just because of the way he interacted with society anyway, these things didn't like necessarily jump out as a change in his behavior. But the flat effect, I think, in the reducing the feelings and pleasures of everyday life, I think showed in the movie with when he had the medication, where it basically just controlled him and took over. So I don't necessarily think that the schizophrenia had the symptom of reducing him. Quite opposite was the reaction. And the cognitive symptoms, it says for some patients, the cognitive symptoms of schizophrenia are subtle, but for others, they're more severe, and patients may notice change in their memory or other aspects of thinking. And I think this was something that I didn't necessarily give it a cognitive symptoms in regards to changes in their memory or in the aspects of the way that Professor Nash was thinking. I don't think it necessarily changed that course of him, because he was a very smart person, excuse me, of genius, and so he was able to still hold on to those parts of his brain, even though he had a false reality on the other parts. So, and then it talks about the treatment and therapies. It made it interesting because the cause of schizophrenia is still unknown. Treatment focus on eliminating the symptoms more than of the disease. And so that's interesting, the idea that as a future marriage and family therapy student, it's interesting that we want to focus, sometimes in the best regards for helping with schizophrenia, is to focus on those symptoms, those different things that are the hallucinations, the delusions, the different aspects, and to help him to understand and to deal with those that overall could help him in the regards to dealing with their schizophrenia. The National Alliance of Mental Illness says schizophrenia is a serious mental illness that interferes with a person's ability to think clearly, manage emotions, make decisions, and relate to others. It's a complex, long-term mental illness affecting about 1% of Americans. Although schizophrenia can occur at any age, the average age for onset tends to be in the late teens to early 20s for men, and the late 20s and early 30s for women. It is uncommon for schizophrenia to be diagnosed in persons younger than 12 or older than 40. It is possible to live with schizophrenia. The causes, they say, it could be genetic. It could be the environment that the person grows up in or is living in. It could be the brain chemistry. Something's going on in the brain that affects it. And then also could be substance use that affects. So it's interesting that going through the studies on all these things, it's hard to see exactly. They can't pinpoint where it is that it begins or where it could be. There's so many of the unknown questions. The treatment plan that I would recommend for Professor Nash if I was sitting with him, first of all, it would be a cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is something everybody talks about. Is that idea? It's a short-term goal-oriented psychotherapy treatment. It takes a hands-on approach in problem solving. The goal is to change patterns of thinking and behavior that behind the people's what their difficulties are, and then they change the way that they feel. So cognitive behavioral therapy is definitely would be a something that I would definitely look into, and I've heard a lot of people talk about the idea. But one thing that's jumped out to me that's been very important, that it's guided me in the idea of what I want to do, is the emotionally focused therapy. And I think it has to do a lot with cognitive behavioral therapy and the idea that it's focusing on changing the person's way of doing different things and changing the way that they feel. I like about emotionally focused therapy, experiential therapy, it's evidence-based approach. And so in the age of schizophrenia, there's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of research that have gone, it's been going on for years, and so it allows to use the things that we've seen in the past, the things that they've studied, to be able to help those people in the future. And that's manifested in a lot of different things in the medicine that they prescribe to schizophrenias. And it's helped a lot of different people. It also focuses on using the emotional side of each family. As the name dictates, emotionally focused therapy, it guides the treatment as a family. And I think that's an important aspect to understand and to be able to realize as a marriage and family therapist, we focus on the system, we focus on the family as a total. Not just one person is affected by schizophrenia. It's something that the whole family needs to get involved in order to help this person to gain a better grasp on reality. The whole family, the whole system has to be involved and have to create a way to recover in these different areas. Emotionally focused therapy believes that all humans have the need for a secure relationship in every aspect and across all timelines of their life. And I think that has a huge thing also in my understanding, and I have a limited understanding of schizophrenia, and then I'm lurking, but it seems to me that it's a relationship based. A lot of diseases and a lot of the things of the mind are maybe created in a way to find and create relationships that we're lacking in life. We could see that Professor Nash in the movie talks about the idea that he's enjoying his work, but he had something come up that's actually giving him a lot more to do. And I think after listening to that, it's just that idea of maybe he's created an alter reality to give him in his mind the genius that he has inside of him, something to focus on, something to tackle. And it's interesting that it talks about that secure relationship. And I think using the emotional focus therapy will help Professor Nash to be able to create better relationships. Take the secure false relationships that he's created in his mind and change them to secure them onto the relationships that we know are true and false. One of the biggest examples in the movie was his wife. She was a definite secure relationship that if he did not have her, he definitely would have faltered, and I think that would definitely had a different ending. And so it's interesting to be able to focus on that idea that you need those secure relationships, and using the emotional focus therapy, we can create different things that we can do to do that. Let's see. Different interventions, validation, primary and secondary emotions, patterns and cycles heightening, and even nonverbal communication all assist therapy in this treatment. So basically using different ways to access what is reality, what is not reality, and what you could do in different circumstances to be able to combat the falsehood or the perceived reality that it might not be there. One of the biggest things that the movie talked about right at the end of it showed the example of a new face came into Professor Nash's life, and he turned to one of his students. He says, "Do you see him?" And I think they make light of that idea, but I think it's one of those things that he's created a system, he's created a family of people that he trusts, and he knows that he can count on, that if something comes up, he can test his theories on. And I think that's an important thing that we can, as marriage and family therapists, that we can create a system that people can use to fight off falsehoods, fight off bad information, fight off the things that they don't want in their life or that they don't understand in their life, because that's what a lot of the different things is. I mean, not saying that schizophrenia is just a lack of information, but as we grow and use the systems that around us, we can take advantage of our surroundings and use that to help us and benefit us. In conclusion, the last question talks about describe how using the family therapy-based treatment would be beneficial for the client. And I think I've been talking about that in that idea that creating those relationships, creating that family system, creating that system that the person can use in order to combat and to understand their reality. One of the things I loved about researching this is I found on successful schizophrenia, they talked about the idea of the book. The book, the movie was based on the book, the same, A Beautiful Mind. And they made a comment that the movie incorrectly portrayed him as controlling his symptoms by taking medicine. The truth is, at the age of 60, after 30 years after his mental breakdown, all traces of the so-called schizophrenia disappeared with no medication, Nash wrote in 1995. Generally, he wrote, I began to intellectually reject some of the delusionally induced lines of thinking that have been characteristics of my orientation. And then 1996, he says, I emerged from irrational thinking, ultimately without medicine other than the natural hormonal process of aging. And I thought that very interesting because, you know, I was learning about different things and is focusing on some future ability to help people as I become a marriage and family therapist, with that idea that he gradually began to intellectually reject some of the delusionally induced lines of thinking. And nothing against schizophrenia, but nothing against a lot of the things that happen with the mind. It can be easily combated with changing the way that people think, rejecting those induced lines that people put on, or that we grow up with, the things that we've been put into our mind that control how we think, done in the right way, with the right system, and the right family, and the right guidance, we can help people to form new thought patterns, to form new options that they can have to create the ability to combat the different things that they have in their mind. So I have a lot of room to grow in my knowledge of schizophrenia and different behaviors that I'm still learning about. But it's very interesting to see and watch and learn about this information. And I think that's all for now. I appreciate the time and taking a look to watch this, and we'll go from there. Thank you.